What's required of a Member of Parliament that a woman, any woman, can't do? Answer, nothing.
We on this side, Mr Chairman, have a few more pearls to cast before these swine.
And if I want to have my say on something, I will.
Yeah, me.
The more you stay out of processes, the less likely you are to be in government.
I love rock and roll. Put another dime in the jukebox, baby. I love rock and roll. So come and take your time and dance with me. Ow!
It's not going to be easy to persuade me that men are going to voluntarily say, yes, we're really ready to share the power.
The underrepresentation of women in Australian politics raises a fundamental question about the legitimacy of our democratic condition and the bias of party politics.
Today, young women can aspire to positions of political power. But 100 years ago, women had no place in the parliaments of the world. Young girls walked toward their future with no right to vote, no right to work after marriage, no right to property or children if they divorced. They were laced in, hemmed in, expected to serve, adorn, and amuse. Most women lived private and domestic lives. Their influence ended at the garden gate. Women in paid work earned less than half the wages of men. Though a woman paid her tax like any man, without a vote, she had no say in public life. In politics, as in law, she had the same status as children, idiots, and criminals, unable to voice what was best for herself. As a new century approached, a new woman stepped forward to challenge conventions, condemning her to home and hearth and silence. I am a new woman, awakened to a sense of capacity and responsibility, not merely to the family and the household, but to the state. The state, however, had other ideas. Are we going to allow women who would sap the very foundations of a nation to have votes? The home cannot be sacrificed on the altar of the fair sex's political ambition. They will flock into every public office, and the moral fabric of the colony will be completely ruined. Politics was a club for men only, and they were determined to keep it that way. Others were equally determined it would change. Catherine Helen Spence was a leader of the South Australian campaign that won the vote for women in 1894. In a world first, the South Australian Parliament also granted women the right to stand for election. Now that women have the vote, said Catherine Helen Spence, the real work begins. At the age of 72, she became the first female political candidate in the British Empire when she stood for election to the convention that would write the Australian Constitution. But in the final count, there were only founding fathers to create the Australian nation. Though their constitution made no mention of women's political rights, the precedent set in South Australia could not be ignored for long. In 1902, the first Parliament of Australia granted white women the right to vote and to stand for election. Aboriginal women were excluded. Yet for a time, Australia led the world as the first nation to grant the majority of women full political rights. In the 1903 federal election, when Australian women first exercised those rights, Vaida Goldstein stood as an independent Victorian candidate for the Senate. The press and her political opponents trivialised her policies, dwelling on her beauty and her rumoured support of free love. No stone is being left unturned to induce you to vote against me, because I am a woman, because I am a non-party politician, because I am a progressive politician, because I defend the suffragettes. Vaida Goldstein was beaten, but the fact that she polled strongly helped her to win an international reputation. In 1911, the famous Pankhurst sisters invited Vaida to England to campaign with suffragettes still fighting for the vote. There, they were chaining themselves to railings, firebombing buildings, and holding mass demonstrations. This was a militant struggle. Suffragettes were arrested, denied the status of political prisoners, and sentenced to hard labour. Those who went on hunger strike were subjected to force feeding by order of government. When Emily Wilding Davidson, an honours graduate from Oxford University, threw herself under the King's Horse at the Derby in 1913, the movement buried its first martyr.
Poor, brave little Emily. It has been said that suffering from some incurable disease, she was doomed to die anyway. But that does not detract from her courage in hurling herself under pounding hooves to demonstrate that even weak women can die for a cause.
At the end of World War I, English women over 30 finally won the right to vote. Soon after, the first women took their seats in the House of Commons. Australia's parliaments, however, continued to be dominated by white, middle-aged men. Though Australian women had won political rights earlier than women in England, their right to stand was not so easily translated into the right to sit. Women, it seemed, were locked out.
The problem for women is, I think, we keep fighting the same battles over and over again. We keep fighting this issue of women in Parliament. We've been fighting that for all of this century. The thing with women in Parliament is that it just doesn't happen as if it were a natural phenomenon. On the one hand, a lot of women are not presenting for pre-selection. On the other hand, there's the attitude of both parties as to whether they will pre-select women who come forward. A pre-selection for a safe seat, for example, will be opened and there'll be a rush of men. It'll be the men who have been involved in the party for ages. It'll be businessmen who think they would like to serve the party, and it'll be a whole range of other men. But what I've noticed over my 18-year membership of the party is that a lot of women don't necessarily offer themselves and say, I think I'd make a good member of Parliament.
The Liberal Party didn't willingly accept me first time off, but that's no surprise. Very few people get in first time. I think a lot of women get unwisely put off when they don't get pre-selected first time and go away saying, well, somebody doesn't like me. Most of the men in politics have tried once or twice before as well.
Senator Kernot.
Mr President, I have the honour to inform the Senate that after a ballot of Australian Democrat members, I have been elected Federal Parliamentary Leader of the Australian Democrats. That's the challenge, Senator Ray.
I took 10 years to get elected, but it was worth it. I think a lot of women have perseverance as a quality, but the processes can be very alienating, really. But see, I had encouragement. See, I had people like Janine Haynes and Janet Powell and other women in the party at both the parliamentary and within the administrative structure of the party, always supporting and encouraging me and other women, and I do the same.
Every time there was ever an election that I had to participate in, they always put me on the bottom of the ticket, which means that, you know, there are 3 candidates go up for the Senate together from each party. And the third in the Liberal side and the third in the Labor side were the 2 who competed. The numbers 1 and 2 just got in automatically. So all my life I was in the fighting position. They never gave me what they did with the men as your seniority, so you went up in the ticket, but not me. I had to fight my way through all the time, and it certainly was a hard fight.
I was, like many women, selected for a marginal seat. Indeed, it was so marginal that no one else put their hand up. And we won it against the odds. It was the first time in 27 years it had been held by the Labor Party. That's a very typical route for women into politics, still, unfortunately, though it's improving. The unwinnable seat, the impossible proposition, and you have to work very hard to overcome those odds. Good morning. Hello to everyone. How are you?
Carmen Lawrence was then brought in as Australia's first woman Premier.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. As you're probably aware, I have been voted by the caucus this morning as Premier. My first priority will be to make sure that trust, openness and confidence in government are restored. I want Western Australians to be able to say that they're proud of their government. In a sense, I was fortunate in the Premier position because there was change within my party. People saw me as a possible leader and the opportunity was a rare one. I mean, you don't often see a Premier who is actually in the job being removed and replaced. So I guess I was in the right place at the right time.
I was offered a marginal seat. I said, no thanks, I can do a better job out in the community. They offered me a safe seat and I said, yes, I'll fight for that one. And I did. I think I got in by one vote. And then I applied the same principles of information, networking, social justice, women as activists to each ministry I was in. I have pleasure in announcing that I am the new Premier and leader of the party, and Jim Kennan is my Deputy Premier and Deputy Leader. What I suppose I actually feel is a sense of determination that we are going to make it work, that we are going to work with the community, we're going to work as a team, and that we're going to win the next election.
In the case of, say, Carmen Lawrence and Joan Kirner, they were not offered leadership at a time that the government was buoyant. They were offered leadership at the time when it was as foregone a conclusion as you could have that that government would fall. And I don't think we should look at those two opportunities as being opportunities that were given to women. I think they were given to someone to take the government out.
I knew what I was doing, and I'm sure Joan did too. I put my hand up and thought, it's worth doing this, even though the result in electoral terms might well be failure. The result in terms of getting more women in politics, I think, has been a success.
It took World War II to get women into the Australian Parliament. Thousands joined the war effort, and 2 marched on to Canberra.
In another field, a much less glamorous task was attacked with just as much enthusiasm. Dame Enid Lyons, widow of former Prime Minister Joe Lyons, and soon to become the first woman elected to the House of Representatives, inspected the tractor drivers of the Victorian Women's Auxiliary Training League.
It would be strange indeed were I not tonight deeply conscious of the fact that on my shoulders rests a great weight of responsibility. Because this is the first occasion upon which a woman has addressed this House. For that reason, it's an occasion which, for every woman in the Commonwealth, marks in some degree a turning point in history.
Well, why do you think there haven't been more women in politics?
That's very hard to say. Probably because Australians as a whole are much more occupied in actual physical work, and muscle power counts a lot, and that is the tradition that I think has made woman in the past the inferior person she is supposed to be.
I realise the great honour which has been done to me in affording me the opportunity to move this address and reply. I also realise my great honour in being the first woman to be elected to the Senate. But it is not as a woman that I have been elected to this chamber. It is as a citizen of the Commonwealth, and I take my place here with the full privileges and rights of all honourable senators.
Once she gets into Parliament, is a woman discriminated against by the men or the system itself?
Oh, good heavens, no. You get... I found that being a woman had every advantage. I got every consideration. It was equality plus.
Enid Lyons and Dorothy Tangney paved the way for other women to enter federal parliament. Yet only 6 more made it to Canberra in the 21 years which followed the end of World War II. In 1966, Liberal Senator Annabelle Rankin became Minister for Housing. Appointed by Prime Minister Holt, she was the first woman to administer a federal department. But no matter how capable, committed or loyal to her party, the female politician was admired most for her motherly instincts. She was relegated to the role of housewife to the nation. The nation's housewives, however, had different ideas. They were going public, encouraging women to play their part on the political stage.
I'd like to see more women in public life, both in civic and in political spheres. I would like to see women take an active interest in their community. If you're not involved, you can't know anything about it. You must become involved because men are involved in it. Now, for years, men have taken their problems home, discussed them with their wives, and with their advice, they have gone back to work the next day and given their considered view. But the woman has stood in the shadow behind the man all the time. It's about time he moved over and gave her a place in the sunshine.
I'm glad to see you're featuring in how women are going to take over the Parliament of Australia like everything else, and you're very welcome here, and of course it's a fascinating place. And the lady who's just been describing something in the building.
I felt when I got to Canberra that I wasn't welcome there, even to the extent of the first day I was there, I was looking around for a lavatory. And I saw this heading Senator's Toilet, so in I went, but it wasn't for me. All the boys were there. There just wasn't one for a woman at all. I can remember, you know, there are a lot of parliamentary committees, and I am a bit of an innovator of ideas, and I'd make a suggestion of something. It wouldn't hit the deck. It would be dead silence. And I thought, oh, that was a dead duck. That's not going to go. 2 or 3 weeks later, one of the men would make the same suggestion, and away it would go. You just were on the outside.
The whole atmosphere and the facilities of the old Parliament House were built on and acted on the premise that there would only be male members of Parliament, male senators. I remember walking into the Senate club room, which is where the Labor senators hung out in between debates and so forth. And an old retired senator, I won't name him, had come in to see his mates, and I walked in and he started complaining and saying, "What's this girl doing in here? Doesn't she realise this is just for senators? Someone speak to her." And his attitude was not unusual.
Well, it's like any institution. It has such well-defined rules, and it's a very male-dominated institution, and I've spent most of my life in institutions, having worked in a maximum security men's prison. I found certain similarities across the two dimensions, and certainly felt that a woman's presence and the kind of influence that we could bring into a place like this was not necessarily welcome at all, and was quite a threat to the system as it operated.
I like to describe Parliament House as a boy's shed, you know, the kind of cubby house that each guy would like at the bottom of the garden. I would argue that this is not necessarily a woman-friendly building. For example, we have a coffee shop, but we still don't have childcare facilities, no parental facilities yet. We have a meditation room. Even the air conditioning is apparently adjusted for men wearing suits. Sitting hours are usually long and pretty inflexible, and the nature of parliamentary debate is often very sleazy and sexist.
Senator O'Chee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't be long. I was reminded this evening of that feminist claim that marriage is rape, because you see what happened was that the Greens decided tonight that they were going to get married to the Labor Party. And what happened? They got raped. They got their morality raped.
Not only are those remarks manifestly offensive to senators in this House, they're quite inappropriate for the debate and for this chamber, and I suggest they be withdrawn.
Well, I withdraw. Getting married to the Labor Party, being married to the... Well, I'm not suggesting... But Senator Kernot, I don't want you in bed with me. Look, I'm trying to keep my virtue clean on this side of the chamber. I'm trying to keep my virtue clean as a single man.
At 5 o'clock, some men can be in there shouting at you in the chamber. At 6 o'clock, you're at the airport catching the plane, and the whole thing is totally different. They seem to have this approach which says it's okay to abuse in here,
You did. Resume you gutter snipe. Oh, yeah, you sit. You'll sit down as well.
I didn't use that way of speaking in the Parliament or in dealing with parliamentary colleagues. I often felt that, well, as a minister, I felt that you were there to try to answer the question. Particularly as Minister for Social Security, you were not there to make the sharp remark. You had to realise that you were the voice for a lot of people with very great needs. So I felt that a serious answer, or even a soft answer, very often managed the situation better than if you were trying to point score.
Mr. Chairman, this government is obsessed with monopolies, but it's a selective obsession.
You can have some really robust debates. You can even have fun. You can make, there can be a lot of wit. And it can be very enjoyable. It's a very enjoyable thing to take part in a stimulating debate from an intellectual point of view.
The envy of the opposition is a matter of great amusement to me. You had an opportunity to be involved in a cooperative process and you have always avoided it so that you can sit there and carp forever and say nothing constructive of your own.
You need to be realistic about the environment that you're going into and to be prepared in some way or another to deal with it. Ideally, you could change it and bring all sorts of new values of rational argument and dignified debate and so forth into the parliamentary environment. But it's very hard to do because the culture's there. It's a bit like saying, well, go into the boxing ring but don't punch too hard.
As was said before, a case of Mategate, where the Minister for Sports is now like a spider pulling more and more people into this web that she's woven for herself. But today there's one real carcass. It's a minister that's hanging dead. A minister that's hanging dead, swinging in the breeze, waiting to go.
Today's resignation brought to a close 7 years in the Labor ministry for Ros Kelly.
I don't think it had anything to do with the fact that she was a woman, by the way. I think any male minister would have been forced to resign as well. In a funny kind of a way, I think it was probably an achievement for equality that she was treated in exactly the same way as a male minister should have been. So I think that was actually a good thing. No special quarter was asked for, and no special quarter was given.
Oh, be quiet. Order. To the industry. All right, Fatty. All right, Fatty.
Senator Burns twice referred in the most uncomplimentary terms to Senator Vanstone, and I asked for the withdrawal of that.
I ask you to withdraw. No. Oh, I withdraw those remarks, of course. But, Mr. Chair, I must make the point that I had some terrible remarks directed at me across the chamber. I didn't call foul. No. I didn't call foul.
There's plenty of men, who have never engaged, on both sides of Parliament, who I cannot recall ever getting down to a personal level. I mean, let's not pretend that women have got some halo unavailable to men here. I think there's a pretty good mix of both types of personalities.
If Senator Collins wants to contribute to this debate, he can get his backside down in his seat, otherwise he can be quiet.
Order. Order.
Everyone's got a backside.
Order. The facts
and as
are
I've said, better big in the backside than bull dust for brains.
Senator Vanstone, please resume your seat for a moment.
I think the risk that you run, Senator Bishop, if I might put it gently, is not that I will ever throw anything at you, but that one of these days I will quietly, deliberately walk across the chamber and garrote you. That's the problem that you confront, not me throwing anything at you.
One of the crusty old Labor members of Parliament referred to me in the chamber as my dear, and he actually said, it was in a debate on Mabo, as I recall, he made some comment about his swimming pool, and he said, if you were in my swimming pool, my dear, there would be a bath ring around it.
Well, sexism is everywhere in the Parliament like it's everywhere in our society. It's not as blatant or as serious as it used to be.
Good try, darling. Good try, darling.
you won't be looking to try selling anything positive to the community until the economy picks up?
Well, Kira, it's only that colour coordination of yours and that wonderful hairdo that sort of encourages me into giving you a very nice reply.
Why did you do it, Mr. Brown?
Mr. Brown, why are you so angry about the press about you silly little girl?
We live in a sexist society. I mean, that's what the women's movement was designed to counter and to replace with more human values.
In Australia, perhaps more than any other country, we believe that a woman's place is in the home. All over these suburbs fly the white flags of domestic surrender.
By the late 1960s, women were no longer prepared to accept second-class citizenship. They demanded equality at home, at work, and in politics. The right to vote had not brought the right to power. Women wanted in. If necessary, they would crash the party.
Laugh! Go on, laugh! We're patronising about dirty jokes, you know, they're funny answers.
Whether it was in student politics or in the women's movement, I wasn't just a subscriber, if you like. I actually got involved, and I was privileged to be part of the early days of WELL. In fact, I think I was the youngest of the founding group. I saw the political institutions around me as very conservative, very stodgy, immovable objects that had to be protested about and jumped on, if you like, from a great height. I guess I changed my mind over time. I thought that the institutions actually would respond to some internal pressure.
What WELL did in the 1972 election campaign is do a survey of all members of Parliament, and they were asked for their views on a range of women's issues. And I think the publicity attached to that survey was very, very instrumental in making the members of Parliament aware that there was a whole group of women out there who were feeling very strongly about a whole range of women's issues. And if the men didn't turn their minds to some of those issues, then there could well be electoral ramifications.
My involvement with the women's movement was really the spur for me to go into politics. I think without that, I might have gone in a different direction entirely. More conservative members of the Labor Party who'd been in the party for a long time were saying that we were like the groupers, that we were an outside group that was infiltrating the party for its own devious purposes. Oh, there was enormous suspicion around the idea of the women's movement, or women's libbers, as they like to call us disparagingly. I mean, not many people really understood what it was about. There'd been dreadful publicity. I mean, really awful. You know, the girls are getting out of the kitchen and playing politics kind of stuff. And that had made people even more confused about what the women's movement was about. They thought it was, you know, something to do with hating men or not wanting children or not wearing bras. For a long time, that kind of confused misunderstanding of feminism coloured what was written. But as the years passed, I must say, so the coverage improved. And I was delighted when Carmen Lawrence, first of all, ran for the seat of Fremantle and then came to Canberra, because the media immediately were concerned about what her health policies would be. Was she Deputy Prime Minister material? I mean, this was music to my ears. No one in the media bothered to write about her haircut or her frocks or whether she changed her glasses or not.
In Canberra, they tell jokes likening her to a Sherman tank and a Rottweiler dog. On radio, they call her Attila the hen. But if any of this name-calling has any effect at all on Bronwyn Bishop, you'd never know it. Beneath the beehivish hairdo is a woman who is so flinty-hard and fiercely ambitious that nothing or nobody seems likely to stop her.
People pay a lot of attention to my hair, but then they call my colleague Alexander Downer Shirley Temple, so I guess it goes in both areas, doesn't it? It's not gender-specific. You've got to be who you are and what you are. I like a neat appearance, therefore that's the way I am, and I won't change it. The Prime Minister was always portrayed as the Undertaker, with his slick black hair and his black suits, and Then we've got sort of large, rotund fellas who come in for a bit of ridicule, don't they? They're largely on the Labor side, I've got to tell you. So there's a bit of give and take in all that sort of thing, and quite frankly, I think cartoonists are pretty amusing.
To people like Jeff Hook, who was a Herald Sun cartoonist, and not a bad sort of a guy, I said to him, Jeff, why do you draw me like that? Why do you draw me in looking like Mother Hubbard with a Mother Hubbard smock on and big polka dot spots and moccasins and my hair in curlers? And he says, and with kids sort of hanging off my apron strings. And he said, well, Joan, I don't know how to draw you. He said, I know how to draw Bolte, I know how to draw Kennett and Kane, Keating, etc., but I don't know how to draw you. I said, why not? And he said, because I've never had to draw a woman in power before.
I mean, I've gone through most of my life thinking I was a fairly average-looking Aussie girl, and it appears I'm not. Now I'm a Member of Parliament. There is comment about my hair, there is comment about my size, there is just constant comment about what I wear, and I will walk into rooms to address people, and the first comment, time and time again, is, oh, gosh, isn't she young? So there is an undue emphasis on age and physical appearance if you're a woman MP.
Any good colours?
Yes, was that acceptable? I was at the women's section lunch.
Oh, yes, how'd it go?
Any comment I was making, whether it was about education, whether it was about natural resources, whether it was about land rights, would be preceded by brunette divorcee, mother of two, or sometimes even attractive brunette divorcee, mother of two, aged 33. And I was constantly being asked, who minds your children when Parliament's sitting? Who's looking after them? Who does your shopping? I mean, nobody asked the men that, even when from time to time there were male politicians who were known to be in a position of having responsibility for their children. They were seen as saints, but I was seen as some potential reportee to the Child Welfare Agency.
That sort of interest in women's personal and private lives is much more prevalent for women political figures than it is for men. And I think it's most unfortunate, and one of the things likely to put women off participating in public life, because nobody cares to have their private lives misconstrued, misreported and misremembered, let alone reported accurately.
The media always made you out to be a housewife, and how did you manage to get the meals and still do your political job? That sort of thing went on all the time. But I can remember speaking to Aquinas College, you know, the Catholic University College, and they said to me, how do you get the meals? And I said, well, I use a pressure cooker. Oh, goodness, he said, is that all you could give them? Things in the pressure cooker. They just couldn't believe that there's any way of me providing a meal and then going out to a meeting.
People reach for cliches when they first discover somebody, and one of the cliches about a woman is that you're supposed to be the childminder, the baker of bread, the drawer of water, all of those things. And those easy cliches, I suppose, are what women generally want to resist. We want to be examined for what we are, we want our performance to be highlighted, criticised if necessary, and assumptions not made about what we might or might not be good at. Whether we're good homemakers or bad ones really is irrelevant to the performance of job.
So the iron butterfly comes home to roost briefly before flitting off to yet another meeting.
In the case of the iron butterfly, it's not an original tag, and I don't really attach a great deal of importance to that particular one. Do you resent it? No, not in the sense that it seems to be applied to any woman in any country who's doing a job.
Well, I made sure they didn't ever take my photo with a broom. I made sure that didn't occur. I also tried to present myself as someone who was doing a particular job in a political career.
I have special interest in a new bill which will be dealt with by the Senate, I believe, next week when we return, and that is one in connection with the formation of...
Senator Margaret Guilfoyle was the first woman in the 74-year life of the Australian Parliament to hold a ministry and be a member of Cabinet. As Minister for Social Security and later Finance, her achievements should have dispelled the myth that women were only suited to the so-called soft or caring portfolios.
When I became Education Minister in the Hawke government, I was delighted with the opportunity that was presented to me. And it turned out, in the early years at least, to be one of the toughest portfolios in terms of funding, community demands, disagreements over political matters like state aid and so forth.
There is a temptation for people to say, "Oh, this is social security, better get a woman's view on this." That's a bit silly, really, isn't it? I mean, the number of men on the equivalent of the unemployment benefit's pretty substantial. I don't see why that's women's business. I prepared a sort of rough outline of an industry policy, and one of my colleagues, who you would normally pick as being a more snaggish sort of fellow, actually said to me, "Who wrote this for you?" And I got stuck right into him and said, "Do you ever ask that of the boys? Well, you know, do you ask them how much their researcher did?" I was appalled. So there is still that notion there, you know. Why would a woman want to say something about industry policy? She must have got someone else to do this.
One of the reasons for having more women in politics is not to have the so-called soft issues or women's issues covered more comprehensively, although that's a benefit, but to have women bringing their experience to bear on all areas of activity in our society, because they are participants in all areas. They benefit from or suffer from decisions of government everywhere from employment, childcare or aged care or finance. I mean, all of those things are matters of importance to women and they should have a say about them. I thought we might miss you because the blues seem to show that you were on first. Right.
How are we going? Isn't it hard just to write a single question? I've got the first question. I'm going to fix it now. Good. I think we start here. We say, in last year's budget, the Prime Minister said, "Sorry, we can't do anything about unemployment, but growth will take care of it." Yeah. Okay, fix that up first. And then we say it didn't happen. Then we do this bit.
Said sorry, we
Can't do much for you.
Well, now that we've got women into allocated positions in the power structure, we do have to be careful that we keep this breadth and keep this twin interest of issues particularly affecting women, like childcare and flexible work patterns, etc., as well as making sure women cover the whole gambit of economics, environment, social justice. What is interesting about some of the young women coming on is that they do see the whole world as their area, not simply issues affecting women. They see women affecting all issues.
But I do want to thank you very much. I know how much time it requires, not just to come here, but to do the preparation and to meet with one another informally and to make all the connections with your various organisations, if you're in the community and in government, to push, pull, prod, poke and cajole government departments who are not always very responsive. Women do tend to be more consultative. They're less aggressive in their approach. They are more inclined to listen. Having said that, I think there are reasons for experimenting with more women, but they don't justify having more women. The simple question is one of social justice, and there are plenty of men who have those same attributes. They're attributes that haven't been particularly valued in the political system, and perhaps that's one reason why women haven't been given much of a show. But on the other hand, you will find aggressive, assertive, difficult, ornery women, to use an American expression. And as I've said before, I defend their right to exist as well.
1 month ago, the Minister continued her support for the use of marijuana, and I want to know whether this is just her personal point of view or if it's official government policy, and which one she will be promoting.
Mr Speaker, that's the question everyone's asking of the member for McKellar, not of me. And I just want to conclude by saying, Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition said at the time he was asked that question and he gave that answer about having tried it. He'd be lying if he said he hadn't. He also went on to say, Mr Speaker, and I felt very sorry for him, he said, "It was foisted upon me." But that's all, I think.
Well, I think you've got to have the ability to express what it is you believe in. And after all, we have two sides of politics because we differ, fundamentally differ, on the way in which Australia should be governed. And you have to be able to both put up with the blowtorch to the belly and be able to express your point of view in such a way that they know what you're about. Mr. Chairman, these are perfectly legitimate questions and go to the heart of the matter.
Well, get to the perfectly legitimate, relevant questions.
They are perfectly legitimate and relevant. I
If
know
you've got
they
no
can be
further
political.
questions, Mr. Boucher, I'm sure other members of the committee have.
Mr. Boucher, so you don't intend to tell me whether it was a meeting?
I don't
All
see
right,
the
you
relation.
don't intend to tell me. Let's move on.
It was brought in to make you, the Commonwealth employees of this government, the employees, the public servants of Australia.
No, I don't think I was accused of being too sensitive. I might have been accused of being too aggressive or too persistent. But fortunately, in a way for me, my own temperament is pretty assertive, and my own way of dealing with stress or opposition or hostility was to fight back. I'm not advocating the adversarial and hostile way of dealing with things. I'm just saying that at that time, there wasn't really much else you could do if you wanted to survive and if you wanted to make progress for your policies and your ideas and your issues and your causes.
I might like to ask the government why they keep adopting our policies.
How about the privatisation of the CES? That's another matter.
Now, Gareth Evans said once that everybody who comes into politics has a mixture of idealism and megalomania. And I think possibly the women who come in have a greater proportion of idealism than megalomania than you generally find, amongst men. And that's probably an explanation for why the female colleagues I know don't openly discuss ambition in terms of advancement within the party.
Let me make this clear. I'm only moving upwards.
Ambition is rampant everywhere you look. People are running for office, they're running for ministerial positions, they're running for chairmanship positions. Everything that happens is contested by extremely competitive people. So when you interpose women across that, it's not surprising that there's a lot of resistance and a lot of competition.
Ambition is rewarded in men. It's particularly rewarded in young men. And women don't get that same kind of response. And it's very, very disheartening. But also this goes to the very nature of power. I mean, power in itself is not a negative thing. And women are taught to think that it's somehow bad to want to be in a situation where you can wield power. And I think about power as something, it is positive. It's something that I can wield for change, and that can be positive change.
Okay. Oh, here we go. We're going next. Okay. Yeah,
Right.
we'll say yes.
Okay. And yes to the ATSIC briefing?
Yes.
Okay then?
Yep.
Right, and I'll
try and find a time.
Okay, then I'll work that out now.
Maybe I won't need to come.
Why, since women got the vote and the right to run for seats in Parliament at Federation, has it taken so long to get even 15% or whatever it is there is at the moment? And the answers are complex. I think they have partly to do with the fact that women look at this and they say, I don't want to be part of that. What a stupid way to carry on, what unnecessary hostility. I don't like to operate like that, and I think that's put women off. But I think the greatest obstacle to women going into Parliament has been, until fairly recently, the attitude of the party machines.
Political parties have seldom selected female candidates. The chosen few have traditionally been handed electoral contests they couldn't possibly win. And women who've stood outside the party system have rarely been successful. Vaida Goldstein ran 5 times as an independent candidate and 5 times failed to win election. I stood as a protest against the vicious system of machine politics. We have work to do in Parliament that no man nor any number of men can do for us. Elizabeth Couchman brought 40,000 members of the Australian Women's National League to the formation of the Liberal Party in 1944. Yet even she couldn't ensure that women had equal rights to pre-selection as candidates. She never gained the parliamentary seat she wished for. Jessie Street, a well-known feminist, ran twice for the Labour Party in unwinnable seats. When she failed to gain pre-selection for a safer seat, she ran as an independent and lost. First in the world to win the right to stand for election. Australian women have seldom won the right to sit. Though time and time again they have offered themselves for political office, in the nation's parliaments, women are still the exception, not the rule.
Women have often been told, explicitly or implicitly, that they lack certain things that are necessary for political life. A tough skin, articulateness, an ability to count heads and kick heads if necessary, that there's something about politics that is other, and in that it's other, they can't do it because it's the male preserve. That's all nonsense, of course, and it's basically designed to keep women out of what has traditionally been a male preserve.
Men are saying, now hang on, I'm not going to stand aside for a woman. And then they're saying there isn't a competent pool, there isn't a pool of competent women available. I mean, the inference there is that every male sitting on the parliamentary benches is automatically competent because he's male, and that's why he's there.
Well, many pre-selections are conducted and concluded on characteristics other than merit. And I don't wish to be unkind to some of my former colleagues, but you only have to look around the parliament to see that that is the case. Factional considerations, what we call time serving, nepotism in some cases even, or a form of nepotism, the mates, very well known syndrome in parts of the Australian Labor Party. These factors come into play, and they are not to do with merit, they are to do with other things. It's really only since we've been able to produce good solid research data demonstrating that women candidates, other things being equal, are very acceptable to the electorate, and sometimes more acceptable to the electorate than a man of equivalent capacity, that the parties have slowly and reluctantly changed.
Today we begin a program to increase the equity of women in the Labor Party. It's a program of affirmative action that will boost the number of women as we move towards the 21st century. We need affirmative action in the party, not because we are enthusiastic about targets, but because we want to make sure that we can establish a mechanism that guarantees, repeat, guarantees, we knock down the old barriers.
And we can no longer be embarrassed by a party which says that other people have to have equal opportunity, other people mustn't practice discrimination, and yet in our pre-selection for seats, we don't practice it ourselves. Comrades, it is no longer good enough to give women the seats to win them. It is essential that we give women winnable seats.
Our view generally is that it's very important that more women should be elected to Parliament, that some extra steps have to be taken to try to redress this imbalance, but that extra step is not simply saying we will have X% by such and such a year. The way to attain it from my perspective is to use the same sort of methods that business use, to recruit people, to train people, to promote people and to encourage people.
I have the greatest potential of any candidate of winning Askin for the Liberal Party at the forthcoming election. In short, Askin needs someone like me.
I'm here to convince you that I'm the right person for you to choose this afternoon.
If you've got a number of candidates that are equally meritorious, how are you going to decide? Well, I'd go along and say, well, I'll tell you how you decide. You take the women when all other things are equal, and you do that because there is this imbalance at the moment. The community is frustrated with it, they want it changed, and therefore you should take that into account. Once you've established that on any other criteria of merit you want to choose, the candidates are equal, then you should give women a go. What we basically say is women want a fair go, not a free kick. I think that's a sort of front bar description of it.
Those women who found their way to the Parliament in more recent years haven't had the support of the community as a whole in the way that I think women in the future will have it. I think you had to be the exceptional woman. You were the always contrasted with your male colleagues. A woman would be called strident, whereas a man would be called strong. A woman would be called hysterical, whereas a man might be called compassionate. Those sorts of contrasts were always made, and it's no longer tolerable simply to have the exceptional woman.
We need people from all walks of life, from all backgrounds. The one thing that's required is to represent voters' interests. Mr. Speaker, I think this is time for us to reassess our position in this society, the way women are represented in Parliament and throughout the community. It's a very convenient view to say that women don't hold power because they're incapable of holding it. That merit is not the reason that they are excluded. Mr. Speaker, if we were simply selected on the basis of merit, there would be 50% of women in this Parliament. And I guess my message to women is, don't wait to be asked, don't wait to be pressured into political life, put up your hand and demand that you participate. To quote a very feisty woman, Sarah Henderson, all the strength you need is within you. Don't wait for a light to appear at the end of the tunnel. Stride down there and light the bloody thing yourself.